Right, I think we'll make a start. Okay, so yeah, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the latest webinar in the Economic Statistics Centre of Excellence's Autumn Research Webinar series. I'm Darren Morgan. I'm the Engagement Director here at ESCoE, and I want to thank you for joining us. Everybody's got busy diaries these days, they seem to have, and so thank you for choosing to spend an hour with us this morning, or this afternoon now. And I think you've chosen really well. We've got a great topic, which is all about defining and measuring the green economy, which is not straightforward. It creates a lot of debate. So we're very lucky to have two experts with us to spend the hour over the next hour with us. We have Will McDowall, who's the Associate Professor of Innovation and Sustainability at UCL's Institute for Sustainable Resources, and he'll be presenting. And we have Neil Wilson, who's the Head of Environmental Accounts and Surveys within the Environmental Economy Division at the ONS. So the structure, for those who haven't been on a ESCoE webinar previously, the structure broadly, it flexes a little bit, but it's broadly 40 minutes for Will to present. Then Neil will have a discussant. As a discussant, will have 10 minutes to respond. And then we have around 10 minutes for questions. And on that, you will see at the top of your screen, you'll have the normal chat function. You'll see that little chat bubble. Now, next to that, you'll have the Q&A button. If you could post your question in the Q&A pane, that would be very helpful. Thank you, rather than the chat. Okay, that's enough from me. Over to Will to kick us off. Will, please.
Great, thank you, Darren, and thank you everyone for joining us. It's a pleasure to be here. I hope the audio is okay. I'm in a very cavernous, echoey room, but hopefully you can hear me all right. So I'm just going to get my slides up here. So I'm going to assume that you can see that, and Darren, perhaps you'll let me know if you can't.
Good, Will.
So yeah. Great, terrific. So yeah, I'm going to talk about some work that we've been doing over the last little while on measuring green economic activity as part of a work stream on the green economy that sits under the Economic Statistics Centre of Excellence funded by the ONS. So I'm going to talk a bit about measuring green economic activity. I'm going to start by talking about why it matters, why it's difficult. I'm then going to talk about why I think the ways that we currently do it are flawed, suggest some new definitions, and then show some work that we've been doing, trying to see how we can use some new data sources to better measure green economic activity. So why it matters is, in a way, kind of obvious. Sustainability requires radical change in our technological systems and sectors. Meeting net zero, meeting the biodiversity crisis means doing a lot of things differently. And, you know, our legacy data systems, our standard industrial classification codes, for example, do not always provide the help that we need in understanding how that change is unfolding, what kind of economic significance it is having, etc. So it's pretty easy for me to look at the SIC code for video rental shops and find out how well they're doing these days, which, you know, anyone under the age of 35 probably has never been into a video rental shop, but I can't find out the economic performance of heat pump installers, for example, heat pump installer companies. So good data is obviously critical for helping to inform policy analysis in this area. It also, of course, plays a big political role, and some of the numbers are used in political narrative as much or sometimes more than in policy analysis. My focus is going to be thinking about how to make sure that the data is useful for answering policy questions. So first of all, why measuring green economic activity is hard. And there's three kind of core reasons that I'm going to talk through for what makes it particularly difficult. The first of them is that green is a relative concept. So what is green today won't be green in 20 or 30 years' time. If you look at some of the slightly older guidance from Eurostat on measuring the green economy, it's talking about things like unleaded petrol as green, green economy activity. That's clearly anachronistic now. And so what is green is relative to some relevant alternative, and it changes over time. And that's challenging for measurement. So this is a figure showing car sales in 2010. and it's showing that, the CO2 emissions of each model of car sold and the sales volume of those models of cars. And in 2010, vehicle excise duty was rated 0, below 130 grams of CO2 per kilometre. So that was a green car in policy terms. 13 years later, the situation has shifted. We have electric cars, we have plug-in hybrids, and what looked green in 2010 no longer looks green in 2023. So, that problem is pervasive across attempts to measure green economic activity, and it makes things really challenging, not least because some things become not green much faster than others. So with compact fluorescent light bulbs, we've seen those go from being promoted by policymakers 15 years ago to now there's talk of phasing them out because they're much less energy efficient than the next generation of technology. So that's the first challenge, is that green is relative and it changes over time. The second is that greenness is multidimensional and subject to trade-offs. So I've got pictures here of a solar farm. Solar is obviously a green form of energy, but there's conflicts with land use and therefore potentially with biodiversity. The central picture is the Southeast London CHP. So when I put things not in the recycling, but in the black bin, that's where it goes. It's in South London, and it's a waste incineration plant that is producing heat and power from waste. So as a waste disposal option, it's, according to some criteria, green, but it's also generating significant CO2 emissions and therefore not green. And then there's a wood stove and, wood stoves, renewable energy, renewable heating, but terrible for air quality. So greenness is not a straightforwardly simple thing where you can just say that's green or not always, because there can be trade-offs between different dimensions. And then the third thing that makes it really difficult is that whether something is green or not often depends on how it is embedded in a wider system. So this is a picture of a battery storage facility that is providing services to the grid. Such facilities are needed for the energy transition. So if we don't have lots of these kinds of things, we will not be able to achieve our net zero emissions targets. But by itself, a battery system isn't green or not green. It could be used just as much in a high fossil power system as in a clean system. So it's an important enabler of greening, but by itself, it's neither green nor not green. So that creates challenges for measurement. So it's not easy, but I think we're currently doing it wrong. And I'm going to focus on the way that national statistical agencies measure environmental goods and services. So under the SEEA, the System of Environmental Economic Accounting, the central framework, the currently agreed definition for environmental goods and services are those economic activities whose primary purpose is to reduce or eliminate pressures on the natural environment or to make more efficient use of natural resources. And that sounds fine, but in practice, it falls apart pretty quickly because primary purpose excludes all renewable energy. It excludes electric cars. Renewables, their primary purpose is generating power. Electric cars, its primary purpose is for transport, right? So the central framework then also says, okay, fine, if something has a green secondary purpose, but then also says it's difficult to infer purposes. So actually in practice, we can largely rely on technical characteristics if something is greener in practice. And the result, in my view, is pretty clear that the resulting measurement ends up reflecting kind of green vibes of a technology or system, not a consistent application of a clear definition, because people are sometimes applying a purpose criterion and sometimes they're applying a technical characteristics criterion, and that just leads to mess. And I'm going to give you an example of how. So if we think about three transport technologies, electric cars, bicycles, and trams, all of these have a whole set of economic activities surrounding them: manufacturing, sales, maintenance, etc. Their main purpose clearly is not environmental. Their main purpose is for transport. Their performance relative to a relevant alternative is that they are all cleaner. So our transport is dominated by the private car fueled with petroleum. These are all cleaner than that. So they're, on a technical basis, they're cleaner. And that's kind of highlighted by the fact that all three of them are actively being promoted by public policy in the interest of achieving environmental aims. Are they included in environmental goods and services sector lists, either those produced by the European Commission or in the UK's environmental goods and services sector typologies? Well, electric cars are, bicycles and trams are not. And so my feeling is that the emphasis on purpose results in new goods and services, like electric vehicles, being treated from old goods and services, like bicycles and trams, despite them having similar salient characteristics. So that's clearly a problem, because it means that when we're measuring the green economy, when we're measuring green economic activities, we're treating similar things differently, and that's biasing our estimates and misleading us as to the size, shape, scope, etc. of activities that are making our economy greener. The second major problem of the central framework is that the definitions in it largely ignore the fundamentally different character of what you might call cleanup type activities and cleaner activities. So what do I mean by that? There are some kinds of activities that only exist to protect the environment. Those are things like pollution remediation activities, pollution abatement technologies. These are the kinds of things that always depend on public policy or civil society. But most of the green economy isn't that. Most of economic activity that's related to improving environmental performance of the economy is about cleaner production or cleaner products which serve a non-environmental purpose, but do so with less environmental harm, like electric cars, right? Serving a non-environmental purpose. And these have really different characters, because cleanup activities, if they are declining, so we can think of landfill here, right? Landfill is a way of avoiding the leakage of waste into the environment. We put it in a specific place and we try to manage that waste appropriately. It's good news if we are doing less of it, right? It's good news if we're doing less pollution remediation, pollution cleanup. It's good news if we have to do less nature conservation, because we're living in an economy that has a regenerative approach to nature already, and that in our agriculture, in our land use, etc., we are preserving nature, and therefore we don't need to do as much in the way of pure kind of conservation. So declines in many of these cleanup activities can be seen as good news from an environmental perspective. And that's completely different from cleaner production activities where, you know, we want to see the whole economy become renewable. We want to see the transport sector become zero emissions, etc. So the economic significance and the path to the relationship with cleaning of these different sectors, different types of environmental activity is different. And in the current guidance, we just add them all together and, you know, track their trends as if that's a single coherent thing. Excuse me. So in this project, we've developed some new definitions, which we think are a little bit more helpful in terms of clarifying different types of environmental innovation or green innovation and green economic activities, and thinking about how those different types have different effects. So first of all, we think it does make sense to have a category of environmental goods and services that do have a main purpose of environmental protection. And this is things like landfill and pollution remediation, etc. And these are likely to be relatively small, and they will always require some kind of public policy or civil society action to make them happen, because there's no other direct market incentive for them. But we then have a second category that is different and should be thought of differently, which is environmentally preferable goods, services, and systems. And then supplying those activities, we have specialized enabling inputs for each of the above. And those specializing enabling inputs may not by themselves be specifically cleaner activities. So we can think here about things like environmental consulting to advise a wind farm, right? It's consulting, it's doing the same sorts of things as consulting in other sectors. It is not intrinsically a greener activity, but it is a specialized enabling input for that greener activity. Similarly, we can think of the manufacturing of a gearbox for a wind turbine. It's very similar to the manufacturing of gearboxes for anything else in terms of the environmental footprint of that specific activity, but it's a specialized enabling input for the production of energy from wind, which of course is a greener activity. So I think these definitions are clearer, but we have to think about how to make them measurable. And in the interest of time, I'm just going to focus on making the middle one, the environmentally preferable thing, measurable. And the way to think about this is that we are looking at activities that are environmentally superior to relevant alternatives. And in order for this to be measurable, this has got to be based on observable differences in production process or technology or business practice that's embodied in the good or the service. So just to give you a kind of an example, it's not super helpful talking about something like energy efficient products unless you have either very clear different product types that have greater energy efficiency, or that meet widely recognized and accepted and therefore measurable, visible standards. Because otherwise we have a sliding scale of relatively more environmentally preferable, and that becomes really problematic when we're trying to look at trends over time. So I'm going to use an example here. This is a screenshot from the survey guidance for the Low Carbon and Renewable Energy Economy Survey, which the ONS run, which is a terrific survey. It's a great source of data for understanding the emergence and development of the UK's low carbon and renewable energy sectors. But it's got some weaknesses, and I'm going to highlight here the way that the energy efficiency bits of that survey make it difficult to look at trends over time properly. So we have categories like energy efficient lighting and energy efficient products, and firms are asked whether they are doing anything in energy efficient lighting or energy efficient products. And they're given examples of the kinds of things that are energy efficient. But they are not asked to report specifically against each of those technological categories. And the result is that there are certain technologies here that are still on the list that are no longer environmentally preferable to relevant alternatives. So compact fluorescent lights are no longer relatively efficient compared to now dominant LED lights. Condensing boilers were a greener technology, back in 2010 when this was first developed, but they're certainly not now. And in both of these cases, government has been thinking about actively phasing out these technologies on environmental grounds. So it seems pretty silly that in 2025 we have them, on the list of survey guidance for firms saying, are you involved in these green economic activities? If something's being phased out because it's not green, we shouldn't be including it in our green economy statistics. So the difficulty is that because we haven't got data specifically on condensing gas boilers or compact fluorescent lights, we can't strip that out of the historical time series. And that means that it becomes really difficult to compare over time. So I think we need to be measuring things that are observable, not just asking people if they've done something that's more efficient and give them examples, because we don't know how people are interpreting that more efficient. We need to be tracking, specific technologies, business practices, etc., that we can recognize and then remove from time series later on if we want to manage comparison over time in our data sets. And we certainly do. That's one of the things that in talking to various stakeholders and developing these definitions was the most important thing to be able to do, to be able to track changes in the scale of green economic activity over time. I recognize, and Neil will no doubt highlight the fact that seeking more granular data, there is a direct trade-off between the costs imposed on the businesses responding to surveys, and I absolutely accept that. But I think the challenge here is in thinking about whether the definitions and the ways that we're applying them now end up being much less useful than they could be, because comparisons over time become meaningless. Okay, so those are the kind of the basic points from my revised definitions. And applying those definitions, we've done some work looking at how across a few sectors that can generate changes to estimates of environmental goods and services. So here is a figure showing on the left, this is the ONS's estimates of environmental goods, the size of the environmental goods and services sector in terms of turnover. And I've added a few categories that we've developed applying that way of thinking to some other sectors. So two of these are circular economy related, to do with the conversion of secondary raw materials and repair, reuse, rental and leasing. And then the third one is to do with transport. So looking at cycling, at electric public transport services like electric buses and electric trains, and looking at the manufacture of electric rolling stock for trains. All of which meet the same definitions, same kind of technical criteria as electric cars do, but historically have been omitted from it. And you can see that including these gives a significant increase to the apparent size of economic activity associated with environmentally preferable activities in the UK. And if we can separate environmentally preferable activities in sectors that we want to see grow from main purpose environmental activities that we perhaps want to see shrink, that will help us to understand and track the transition to a greener economy. And of course, as things change over time and become seen as less green, we can strip them out of the historical data and then look at, okay, where are we at in the transition towards a new standard of green? So what I've suggested is challenging from a data perspective. And in the UK, we're really fortunate to have the Low Carbon and Renewable Energy Economy Survey, which has been asking businesses for over a decade about their low carbon and renewable energy activities. But it's obviously costly, and we have been thinking about new data sources that can inform revised estimates. So for these data, I've drawn on a bunch of, some of it is standard data from the annual business survey using relevant SIC codes. Some of it is specific to transport statistics published by the Department for Transport. Some of it is taken from industry sources, looking at the conversion of raw materials and looking at material flows. So we can make use of a lot of existing data sets, but there's also new data sets and data approaches that can be really valuable in helping us to understand an area like the green economy where traditional industrial classifications really don't work for much of it. And so one of the tools that we've been using is a web scraping tool, a web scraping and machine learning platform called the Data City, which I'm sure many of you have heard of or are familiar with. And what the Data City does is reads all of the websites for UK businesses, matches those websites to their records in Companies House, and then runs a classifying algorithm based on website text. So you feed the platform some companies that you've chosen, and you ask the platform to find similar companies that do similar things. You can then work with the platform to identify relevant areas of green economic activity. And so we've used that platform. So some of the data I'm showing here comes from the Data City. And that's hugely valuable for identifying areas of green economic activity that are not well represented by traditional statistics. And for some of these, like retail sales of bicycles or bike maintenance activities or peer-to-peer resale platforms like Vinted, when we use the Data City, we get a very good match with the expected SIC code. So it seems that the tool is doing a good job at identifying firms in the right sectors that we would expect. But we thought we should look a bit more closely at the degree of agreement between the data city, which provides a list of firms involved in the net zero supply chain, and the outcomes of the low carbon and renewable energy economy survey from the ONS. Both of those provide firm level data on whether a company is involved in low carbon renewable energy activities or not. So we've linked firms from the Data Cities Net Zero list with data from the ONS Low Carbon Renewable Energy Economy Survey in the SRS, the Secure Research environment. And one of the things that has done is reveal that the sampling frame used by the ONS when they are sending out their low carbon renewable energy economy survey, they don't send it out to all sectors of the economy. They skip some on the assumption that there's no low carbon renewable energy activity in those sectors, and thus it will be a waste of everyone's time. What we've shown, though, using the Data Cities data, is that there are parts of the economy that were not being sampled that do actually contain real and important low carbon renewable energy economy activities, particularly in specialist finance and insurance services for the energy transition. So companies that provide specialist insurance products for renewables, for example. And so that's showing that this kind of data could be really useful for that kind of thing. We've also done some work to, at the sort of more micro level, at that firm level, comparing the extent to which the classification of the data city agrees with the firms themselves when they have responded to the low carbon and renewable energy survey and said that, yes, they are active in those activities or they are not. And as you can see, this is work in progress. So I want that to be clear that this is not the last word, and we're making some changes that will adapt this. But I want to share some of the things that we're learning from it. And at first glance, it doesn't look great. So this Euler diagram shows this bubble is turnover of firms that have been surveyed by the ONS Low Carbon Renewable Energy Economy Survey and said that they are active in those activities. This larger bubble is turnover among firms who have been surveyed by the Low Carbon and Renewable Energy Economy Survey and said that they are not involved in those activities. And this bubble in the middle is the Data Cities list of firms involved in the net zero supply chain. And you can see that there's, what we ideally would expect is that this beautifully overlaps with this, and that if you are a firm that has said that you are active in low carbon and renewable energy, you are also captured in the Data City, and that the Data City's list of net zero related firms, and that if you are not active in those areas, then you are not captured. And so at first glance, it doesn't look great, but there's a bunch of reasons for the discrepancies that actually highlight some of the challenges in defining green economic activities. And that I fully expect that the additional work that we're going to do is going to reduce those apparent mismatches for a bunch of reasons. So first of all, this bit, which is the kind of the firms that are missed by the Data City, some of those will have gone out of business since being surveyed. So we're updating some of our data to take account of that. But there's also important differences in the ways that stakeholders have driven each of these processes. So the Data City Net Zero list has had civil servants and other policy stakeholders crawling all over it saying, this is what we want to see in this list. And some of the choices there reflect different choices from the choices that have gone into the Low Carbon Renewable Energy Economy Survey. So, for example, the Data Cities Net Zero list had excluded automotive companies that are, unless they're building electric cars. So it was excluding hybrids, it was excluding innovation in cleaner engines, etc. Whereas that was all included in the Low Carbon and Renewable Energy Economy Survey. So we've got different system scopes going on right at the kind of the nitty gritty of specific technologies. And that has been quite difficult to kind of take account of, but we're working on that. And similarly, there's technologies that stakeholders today, who are the ones using the Data Cities platform and producing that net zero, that kind of published net zero list, are not including things like condensing gas boilers, which somehow is still in the low carbon renewable energy economy survey. So there's reasons that we have large activities here that sort of should be over here. But there's also some reasons why we might expect the data city to collect some companies that it shouldn't be collecting. One of those is greenwashing, and this is a limitation of web text based data. We can simply expect that some companies are not involved in green economic activities, but that their websites plastered with language about sustainability, green, this and that. And we have identified some firms for which that's true. But generally, it's interesting to observe that the firms in this area here, so firms that have told the ONS they're not engaged in low carbon renewable energy economy activities, are in very similar sectors to the firms, I've lost the mouse, to the firms that are here, that are. So the data city is picking up firms that are in the right sectors in very similar activities. Now, it may be that they have similar enough website text, and actually the users of the platform need to spend a bit more time kind of refining the machine learning process, putting in more firms that are bad examples and adding more firms that are good examples of firms that are involved in genuine low carbon and renewable energy activities to improve the performance of the machine learning algorithm. But there's also the possibility that lots of these firms offer low carbon and renewable energy economy goods or services as part of what they do as a company, but that in any given year, they don't necessarily sell any of those services. So you can think of lots of consulting firms that might provide and advertise consulting in relation to renewable energy, for example, but that in any given year don't necessarily have any clients, and therefore, when surveyed by the ONS, will have to say, no, we're not involved in that. So we're looking into that, and we firmly expect that therefore, there's some reasons why this bubble is going to move a little bit to the left. But it does highlight that there are some serious weaknesses of web text data, and those are the ones that we would expect. So first of all, it's difficult to validate it unless you go through this kind of process. And that in areas like green, where we expect greenwashing, we do find some greenwashing, and that's going to inflate our estimates of the size of green economic activities, and is something that is difficult to avoid. So some sources of the discrepancy, I'm going to talk through them. It's difficult to fully align the scope because the data city stuff is brand new, it's live. So our data was from 2025. The most recent data that we can access in the ONS SRS is from the financial year ending in 2021. So there's a lot of movement of firms diversifying into and out of green economic activities over those years. We do see influence of greenwashing. I talked about companies don't perform all advertised services in each year. And a final point is that the data city is producing a list of companies for clients that are interested in companies involved in the net zero supply chain. And when they see that at the top of the list is BP and Shell, and the top of the list because they're big in terms of output, they think, well, hang on, that's not right. So where there are large companies whose main activity is not something green, those can get filtered out by, manually by the Data City team or by users themselves thinking, okay, well, that's not quite what I mean, even though those companies are involved in clean energy activities, even if it's only, about 1% of what they do. So some conclusions on the web text data. It is hugely promising for identifying firms involved in clean energy activities or all clean activities in general where no other data sources exist. And in the work that we've done, we found it aligns very well with the expected SIC codes for those sectors. It's particularly useful in identifying areas of the economy where particular activities are happening, which can then be followed up by looking at other data sources, looking at survey data. But it is, of course, true that the text that companies put on their website can be misleading about what they actually do. And one of the things that is really clear is that when you are using a tool like this, one of its strengths is flexibility. But what that means is that it requires a certain amount of sector-specific expertise, knowledge, and understanding in order to be using the right terms, be putting in the right firms and removing the wrong ones, and adapting the search strategy and the training set in ways that mean that you're getting a good outcome that actually broadly mirrors what you're interested in. And that takes expertise. So although it's easy to think of these kind of web text based methods as offering a much quicker solution, they do, but it's not it's not without a certain level of expertise and work required in terms of developing the right training set. And finally, unlike the low carbon renewable energy economy survey, which asks firms, okay, you do some work in offshore wind, what share of your revenue, how much turnover is in offshore wind? The Data City platform can't tell us anything about the scale of firms' green activities. So it can tell you, is this firm involved or not? But it can't tell you how much it's involved. And we tested that a bit. We looked at whether the strength of the affiliation based on the kind of degree of similarity to the training set of the website text, if that correlated at all with the share of activity of the firm that was green. So if we gave it a training set of companies that were kind of purely, or that 100% of their economic activity was in a green sector, and we then looked at the companies that had website text that's most similar to those, does that correlate well with the share of those companies' activities that's green? We thought it might, but in the test that we did using wind companies, we didn't find any evidence for that. There was no correlation. So to wrap up, my view is that the way we currently measure green economic activity has some pretty huge weaknesses, big conceptual kind of messes where we're not really clear why we're including some things and why we're excluding other things. Those weaknesses leave big questions, in my view, about the right numbers to be using if we're trying to track the scale of green economic activity over time. And I think there's clear ways in which we can improve that data significantly by having much clearer definitions and making use of existing data sources. We can also use some of these new data sources like from web text, but we just have to be sensible about what web text can and can't do in doing that. Yeah, so I think there's plenty of scope for improving the way that we measure green economic activity in the UK, making it more consistent, more accurate, and more useful for policy and practice. So I'll just about leave it there and invite Neil to respond. Before I do, let me just close by saying, if you're interested in green jobs, you should look at the ONS's work on green jobs, which closely relates to all of this, which, they've done really interesting and useful work thinking about different ways of measuring green jobs. But if your kids are interested in green jobs, then you might want to get them for Christmas the book I wrote for kids earlier this year, looking at solutions to climate change explained through the jobs that kids can grow up to do that fight climate change. So there's an invitation for you there. Okay, so I'll leave it there after the shameless plug, and yeah.
Thank you very much, Will. And we said that you're very thought-provoking, lots of interesting things there. And we said that could you finish around 12:40? And it's 12:39, so you nailed it in terms of time as well. So thank you very much. I've just come in briefly before I hand over to Neil to just remind people, just think about questions that you might have now that you've listened to Will. And my thanks to Alex, Tom, and Anna already who've posted some questions in the pane to get us going. But Neil, welcome your thoughts. Over to you.
Right, lovely, thank you. I enjoyed the shameless plug in particular there, thinking about my kids' Christmas lists. Sarah, would you be able to share the slides that I'm working on for this? It's just I'm on a limited screen here and it'd be a little easier if that's okay. Oh, lovely, thank you. So, yeah, just to introduce myself. So as Darren said at the outset, I'm the head of the environmental accounts and surveys area within ONS, within our environmental economy division. And obviously had the pleasure of working with Will as part of this ESCoE work and seeing this evolve. So it's really good to see this come together. And obviously it draws and uses and references a lot of the work that we do within my part of the division. So yeah, as I say, it's really welcome this work and welcome the challenge that it provides to what we produce and sort of how we go about producing it. And I think in a way it's very timely. I'll get to some of the sort of wider work that's going on in a bit, but I think this probably sits at a good moment for taking some of that challenge and kind of recognizing what we might how we might deal with that and how we might sort of take some of those challenges forward and try and address them. So plenty of opportunities there, as well as kind of the challenge element to it. Yeah, if we just flick on to the next slide, please. I mean, I think a reflection I've had, and I will get a little bit more onto what we've done with our green jobs work in a minute that Will also mentioned, because I think that for me acts as a good example of where this can become quite difficult. That was the overriding lesson that we had from much of our sort of work on green jobs, was that it is difficult. So that it's not easy being green line really reflects the fact that there's a number of pressures in on this, and trying to come up with something that's green, that people understand and that people are content to use isn't as easy as it might sound. And certainly in some of the work we've done, people are coming at that with very different ideas of what green might mean. And something that we try and sort of get across and define in what we produce a lot of the time is that often our outputs aren't really what we'd call green. They're about something very specific that perhaps is a different angle on the economy or is a different sort of subset. So within the surveys, we're very clear about kind of how our low carbon survey is about that low carbon and renewable energy economy, specific to that, as it very much says in the title, and it's slightly distinct from green, where sometimes it was being used as a proxy for green jobs and green outputs, but actually isn't the same thing. So that's something we've had to work through and continue to work through, and trying to define what actually speaks to that question of greenness and kind of what is appropriate within that. So it's within that landscape, we've got a lot of different players within it. It's a very diffuse subject across government in terms of who owns different elements of the environment and green activity and who owns the policy for those. And with us, we're very much coming at it from that sort of economic environmental angle and kind of the relationship between those two things. And that plays out in sort of our environmental accounts as well, where we're looking at that sort of contribution to the economy from the environment, the impact the economy is having on the environment, and sort of those relationships between them. So we do have that wide range of work within ONS. Like I say, pinning back to that idea of the environmental and the economy. Thinking about frameworks and definitions, I think Will made the point that kind of some of the traditional frameworks don't sit well against it. And we definitely experience that, definitely agree with that. So something like the SIC, the structure doesn't sit neatly against what we're looking for. So in something like the ELCRE, we have our bespoke sectors, which are of an edge. I think that speaks to some of the points that Will's raised about some elements that are in there that perhaps don't sit so well now within that kind of definition of what people expect to understand as green, but were more relevant at the time. So that need for it to be a constant evolution, and how you reconcile that against frameworks that take a long time to agree and a long time to kind of set up and kind of get implemented, is a bit of an ongoing challenge. And I'll get back to the sort of wider CF framework, the central framework that underpins it, I think, in my last slide. That's partly why it's good timing for this, because we are in the depths of sort of revising that at the moment. So it's a broad landscape in it within in framework terms, but it is something where we definitely recognise the need for things that are more bespoke to what we're looking for, and the fact that we need to have those definitions within them that well understood and that kind of people are making the right use of. So just move on. I think I was going to use the green jobs work as a little bit of an example of what we did. And as I said, it did highlight that difficulty. We found that there's a lot of people were talking about green jobs as a concept, and what green meant to them often reflected their own interests or kind of what they were looking to pursue. So there's different bits of government were thinking of it in different ways, maybe the policies that were more relevant to them. Private sector was thinking of it perhaps more in terms of the services that some of those firms that were working with it were looking to sort of work through with potential clients. So it was generally quite broad, and we've spent a lot of time working with other departments, sort of putting it out to a sort of a sense of consultation, really, to come up with something that we felt kind of covered green as a concept. So it was going beyond what some people understood our LPRI survey to be giving, which was more focused on that net zero, that low carbon element, but there's something that went into that wider environmental angle, sort of that broader sort of use of stuff that gets into nature, biodiversity, ecosystems, and so on. So that's where we ended up with our, so get this verbatim, but the employment in an activity contributes to protecting or restoring the environment, including those that mitigate or adapt to climate change. So something fairly broad. But within that, we sort of recognize that, again, it's coming at things from a different angle. And we've got sort of 3 measures at different stages of development, I think it's fair to say, and where it, again, reflects another challenge, which is just the availability of data to feed those. So for something like our industry-based approach, we're looking at those sort of things that are considered green industries and sectors. And that feels, that we're able to put something more robust to that we're able to use the sort of existing surveys and sources that we draw on. So a mixture of survey, administrative data, and some model estimates to build something that feels like it can answer that. So those green industry sectors, reasonably solid. For occupations, again, it's something where you've got classifications out there, such as SNOC, but it's not necessarily a good fit against what we're calling green. So we're looking to try and get those based on the activities, the actual workers, the objectives of their work, what they're doing. So they might be a green activity within something that you might not consider a green industry, but theirs is still a green role. And then the final one was around our firm-based approach. And that sort of basically allows any firm doing whatever it might be doing, not necessarily low carbon sort of outputting sector, but that it's doing it in a way that is environmentally neutral, that it's kind of got that sort of non-impacting boundary to it in the way that it operates. So no emissions, or ideally we'll be looking at things where they don't have further onward impacts, such as onto biodiversity or sort of pollution impacts as well. So it's something where I think that green needs to reflect those multiple angles as well. So if we just move to the last slide, I think what thing I'm sort of finding in what we've done with this is that it's just trying to make sure that people understand and use what we're giving them when we talk about green, having come across those multiple definitions. That's a very important angle on it. As I said before, the central framework is what we used to underpin the creation of a lot of our accounts. And it's a framework that dates from the most recent iteration, was 2012. It's currently undergoing a process of revision at the minute. And I think that will answer, or it will certainly speak to a lot of the sort of challenges that Will's raised in terms of kind of broadening out some of the activities that are framed within it and kind of making a better capture of what might be considered green. So, for example, there's a couple of elements within that revision that looks at the broader scope of environmental activities. So we could be going beyond sort of what's in the environmental protection and resource management categories to start looking out at more of the activities that might fit within mitigation or the circular economy or climate change adaptation. And that, along with sort of perhaps some additions or some sort of supplementary lists to the sort of framework that is those classified expenditures for protection, could start to give that better coverage of the economy. So through that and through what we're pursuing in that work to try and get a fuller set of accounts, a more complete set of environmental accounts, should go a long way into giving that much more complete green picture. So this is a bit, so my promotion isn't for a book here, but it is in a long way around, because this produces a book, which is the updated CSCF, which hopefully will be a sort of 2028 edition. So in the early part of next year, hopefully we'll see some of those guidance notes that are being written going out to public consultation, including concepts such as the sort of range of activities and other things such as that primary and secondary use, and the purpose definitions versus some of the technical definitions of activities and products, all play into what we're talking about here, I think. So I would definitely encourage people to look out for that, to engage with that process, and to consider how that might sort of be worth feeding back on. So very much an expansion there and an evolution there. I realize I've got to time, so I think my end point is that this is a massive long-term movement in where the economy is. And I think one thing I'm cautious of is not expanding it too much to be too broad in its definition and sort of cover some things. I see a lot of upside measurements, I think. So I think we're always a little more on the cautious side of what we allow to creep into the scope of it. But there is this point where this, hopefully, the end point is this fully green economy. And that gets me to the end of my quoted song from the very start, where green is all there is to be. Thank you.
Very nice. Thank you very much, Neil, for your thoughts as well. So not bad, very good. Thank you. So we've got some time to get through the questions. So thanks again for people who posted questions already. We'll try to get through as many as we can, hopefully all of them. And we'll start with Tom's classic challenge here, I think, where Tom says, given the importance of consistent time series for economic statistics, even if you had the granularity, how would you manage the changes in the definition of green? Will, Neil, welcome your thoughts on this one.
I mean, yeah, okay. So, the way I think about this is that if you have periodic revisions of your definitions, and you have granular data, you can strip out of the historical time series the things that you are less interested in. So you can look at, for any kind of given period, you can think about what you think of as relevant for green during that period. And it doesn't solve the problem, but it clarifies what definitions are applying when, and what specific things you have in there and when you don't. One way to think about it is that you can think about scales of investment in things that were green at the time, and then you maybe don't need to strip things out. But what granularity enables you to do is to understand exactly what you meant by green at any one time, and that helps you to understand what you mean by historical trends. So if you're trying to track growth in activities that you think of as green now, you can use the historical time series to do that, because you've removed all the stuff that you no longer think of as green. If you're asking a different question, which is the relative scale of investment into things that are green at any given time, then you don't need to strip them out. So I think having granularity allows you to understand what historical data sets and time series tell you, and depending on your question, you can strip things out or not, and at least understand exactly what they contain in terms of specific economic activities.
Many thanks, Will. Neil, do you have anything to add to Will's excellent intervention?
Yeah, I mean, I would be keen to see the sort of granularity of what we capture improved, to both in that sort of activity product sense, and probably on a geographic dimension as well. I'm a sucker for time series, and I'm a sucker for granularity. I suppose the compromises we have to make are often about what is possible in terms of the burden that the survey can apply and the scale that we can kind of run a survey at, which does give us a bit of a challenge. So I think sometimes that's going to be about trying to meet some of that through better linking up with other sources and kind of other surveys, other sort of administrative surveys, to try and tease out the possibilities of breaking down some of those sectors in a slightly different way, because I don't think we'll get all the way through some of our more traditional survey methods. I also think that probably, as much as I love a time series, we probably have to accept a few discontinuities, just where it's, certain things are going to drop out and have to drop out. Certainly certain things are emerging, new industries, new products, new activities that will come in and will pick up. So we'd see that within the context of this overall aggregate transition kind of element, but accept that there is some flux within it. But I think, as with many things, there is a happy medium in between the situations.
Okay, thanks.
Darren, can I just come in on
Yeah,
that?
of
Because
course
I
you
think
can.
that point about things dropping out is really important, because what dropping out does is, so hybrid vehicles, for example, or condensing gas boilers, they should now drop out of our time series on low carbon renewable energy economy activities. That will shrink the apparent size of the low carbon renewable energy economy. And that shrinkage is good news. It's representing progress towards higher environmental performance. But we just have to be, if we can do that stripping out of specific things, and we can strip them out historically, we can tell the difference between reductions in apparent green activity that are associated with definitional changes and reductions that are associated with declines in green activities. And unless we have granularity, we can't do that.
No, that's a good point. Good point. And Will, in the interest of time, I think Alex have got a sneaky little ask for your institute in his next question. So I'll let you respond.
Yeah, okay. So can we implement these ways in standard data sets where we rely on occupational industry codes? It's a bit of a hodgepodge of an answer, because yes, in some cases we can. So some of the kinds of data we would be able to link directly at the firm level and then produce estimates of kind of shares of specific SIC codes that are engaged in green activities. In some cases, some of the redefinitions that I've looked at involve actually just recognizing that some existing SIC codes should be thought of as green, but historically haven't been. So that's, you can have that for free. But yeah, there's challenges here where you have activities that are difficult to capture, in an ongoing way, and then you would have to be updating that if you wanted time series, by continually doing that firm level linkage, which is obviously difficult.
Thanks, Will. So Kirsten, thanks for the talk, and said, how could we capture sufficiency related sectors activities? For example, avoiding mobility may be even less resource intensive than sustainability mobility. Would you capture this?
That's an extremely good question, and I think it's really difficult. And one of the things that I think environmental economists generally have tended not to think enough about the drivers of demand and what shapes demand and preferences for the specific kinds of activities, and how to measure when people are not consuming because social norms have shifted, or because there's alternatives which are non-market, non-consumption alternatives that they prefer. So, if you go for a walk with a friend in the afternoon instead of going shopping and buying stuff that you don't need, how on earth do we capture that? I'm afraid I have absolutely no good answers. I think the real difficulty is that the tools that we use to track economic activity are all the product of market activities, which is exactly what we're tending to try to avoid when we're talking about sufficiency. So there are kinds of indicators that you could create from the sort of the peripheral economic activities that relate to some of those sufficiency type activities, but I think it's really, really challenging.
No, thanks, Will.
I think what you end up doing is trying to model what you would have done counterfactually, and then you're into a whole kind of set of really difficult estimations.
And I should have said, Kirsten, thank you very much for providing a link to some related work to this. But Neil, anything to add to Will on this one?
Oh, I mean, this probably gets into a slightly more personal opinion rather than the official ONS one, but I think, and it comes out of what Will said there, is there is a much broader range of things that you need to start to look at and understand and measure from this. It's a green transition, and it just deserves so much more effort and investment than we're currently able to make in it, in terms of getting it implemented across multiple data sources to try and understand some of the other behavioral shift elements, and kind of just putting more effort into the kind of the collection of stats and research on that. It needs a big kick along the road to really give us that full coverage. that would be my desperate plea for it, really. Like I say, that's very much my individual feeling on that.
No, thank you, Neil. Let's try to get along. We've hit time, but let's see if we can get through the final two questions, and I'll flag something else as well, quickly if we can. Damien is interested, Will, in how you link the data that you shared on the presentation.
Yeah, so that's we worked with the ONS secure research environment, and so what we had was a list of firms and some of the firms' characteristics in terms of their company registration number, and what we did is submit that to the EntRef matching service run by the SRS or the IDBR team or someone, and they take those CRNs, they convert them into EntRef, so enterprise references, and then those get imported into the secure research environment. So there's a kind of a secure step between us and seeing any of the identifiable data. It does raise interesting points, though. I mean, one of the challenges with the web scraping is what they are doing is they have to do this really difficult matching of a URL, you know, a company's website to a company registration number, and you know, there's an error rate there, of course, but also, you know, exactly which company registration number you end up with, there can, for this what looks like the same basic enterprise, can have a bunch of registered holding companies and, you know, all sorts of things. So you know, there's some kind of further challenges there in terms of linking microdata that are additional sources of error.
Thanks very much, Will. And David, the last question, hopefully it's a relatively straightforward one. David asked the question, Will, the data city sounds good for producing national level figures, but is it available regional? And if yes, what's the lowest geographic level?
Yeah, well, so they have the address of each firm. So they I think it's largely based on the in fact, I'm not going to say because I'm not sure. But yes, they do produce a lot of regional level data and statistics. So yeah, and their chief economist was previously spent 16 years at the Center for Cities. So, you know, they really are thinking about regional patterns of economic activity. I'm not going to comment on what's the smallest level they could reasonably expect to get accurate estimates for. That's really a question for them. But certainly they do have geographic data in there.
Thank you very much. Well, and just one final thing I would say, in the meeting chat, David Beckett, who works at ONS, has very helpfully flagged that he's responsible for producing a new SIC framework, and he shared his latest thinking in there, and Will have suggested that he would welcome a call if you're interested in sort of feeding into the process on creating a new SIC definitions for the green economy. I think that's a very good connection, actually. We can connect you. Okay, that's it, I think. So thank you very much to Will and Neil for sharing their expertise and knowledge with us. I don't know about you guys, but I learned a lot, and there's very interesting stuff. So thank you for that. Can I also thank Sarah Woodcock, who very quietly behind the scenes makes all this happen and organizes it all and makes sure it goes very smoothly, which we're always very grateful for. I'd like to thank you again for those who have joined us for the latest hour. As I said, people have got busy lives today, but very grateful that you spent an hour with us, and hope you found it as interesting and as I did. Can I wish you a very good rest of the day and a very nice weekend when it arrives, and hopefully see you soon at another webinar. Thanks very much, everybody. Speak soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.